So hello and a very good evening YouTube. And as promised मैं बोला था कि भाई बाइकों का कंटेंट तो कम हो गया बट कारों का कंटेंट शुरू करेंगे. So we are here today at Check Engine's garage. That's become like the home garage for me since the past few days. If you guys have been following me on Instagram, if you're not then please follow कर लो भाई. तो वहाँ पे पूरे लाइव अपडेट्स दिख रहे सबको कि भाई जोहर भाई हल्लू बाइकों से कारों में घुस गए, कारों का कंटेंट इतना कर रहे बना रहे मगर यूट्यूब पे कुछ पोस्ट नहीं कर रहे. Lots of complaints. So finally, trying to take out time and shoot as best as I can, try to give you some informative videos regarding the builds we have in our circle, some updates from the garage and everything else. So आज का video, without taking too long to explain, it's going to be the top 8 problems, major and minor. वो 4 major 4 minor उतना fancy अपने script writing का time तो नहीं मिला, but the most common and the most major and the most annoying problems you might face if you pick up a LoRa, VRS or a TSI as your project car. So the most common problems that you're going to face, and some of them, if with prior knowledge, it will save you a lot of time, a lot of money. And ये काफ़ी hit or miss experiences से मेरे और पर्सनल हमारे सर्कल के गाड़ियों में हम लोग सीखे कि गाड़ी लेने के बाद क्या क्या चेक कर लेना, क्या करना. This is not a video per se about what to look for when you're buying a used project car. There's going to be a separate video for that. तो जनरल चीज़ें तो I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I'm assuming that all the fluids, all the belts and everything else has been changed in your car. जब आप second hand में गाड़ी ले रहे हैं काफ़ी ऊपर रेट पे almost 1/4 or less of the price of the original car. The least you can do is change all your belts, pulleys, ये वो जनरल चीज़ें, जनरल सर्विस ऑयल सब चेंज करने के बाद का ये specific to 1.8 TSI engines, either it be LoRa or even Superb TSI for that matter के बारे में है. So without further ado, let's jump into it and begin. So the number one most, according to me personally, सबसे बड़ा और सबसे बड़ी भैरी लगेंगी अगर फेल हुआ तो, that is your most common problem with all these 1.8 TSI Gen2 engines is your timing tensioner and your timing chain. So let me explain it to you in a very crude manner. So basically the tensioner has a job of putting load on your guide. The guide presses against the timing chain and that's what keeps the tension between your cam gears and your complete engine. So basically engine or cam pulley sync में चलना, pulleys with the engine, basically it's like a happy married life. Both of them have to be in sync. अगर sync out हुआ तो वहाँ तो लड़ाइयाँ होते हैं, यहाँ पे पूरा बगेन में मिल जाता मसला. So the most common problem people face is failed tensioners. That's why you see a lot of these 1.8 TSIs in the scrap market, and even internationally if you go to some forums and all, you'll know that the tensioner problem is pretty common, along with timing chain slack बहुत बढ़ जाता, timing chain बहुत खींचे जाती. Those are वो थोड़ा बाद में डायग्नोज होते हैं, but the most important thing is your tensioner. So if you're buying a used car, the first thing you do is take off your timing cover. Previous owner कुछ भी बोलता भाई मैं करा लिया ये वो, बिस्मिल्लाह बोल के आप खामोश फेबी की या कोई अच्छी टाइमिंग किट लियो, change the entire timing kit even if all your guides and all are good. But if the guy has genuinely changed it just a few kilometers ago, you need to check for the part number. So what exactly happens is Skoda has given this timing chain tensioner with the 06H revision part number, which came in the 2009 to 2012 cars, which were sold here obviously. That tensioner is pretty prone to failure because it is a design flaw, manufacturing defect, call it whatever you like to call it, and India being India, recalls were not taken that seriously. So कई गाड़ियों में ये they come with those faulty tensioners. We can fail at 30,000, 60,000, 1 lakh, कभी भी fail हो सकता है. I've seen these tensioners fail on cars as less driven as 30,000 because let's admit it, 10 साल पुरानी गाड़ी है तो खड़े खड़े भी उस पर आपको प्रॉब्लम होने ही वाली है. So what you have to look for is when you're buying a timing kit, just go for the one with the revised part number, that is the 06K part number, not the 06H part number. So the 06K is the latest revision, the updated one. So if you have that tensioner, and meanwhile when you're at it, get your mechanic to check everything else. पूरा किट का किट एक साथ डाले तो अच्छा है, but you can upgrade just the tensioner as well. So what happens is these tensioners are prone to fail under loads. When you're accelerating under high RPM, the tensioner snaps, the spring snaps, it loses tension, and when you're at a higher RPM, even एक या दो दाग स्लिप हुए तो piston valve, I pronounce you husband and wife बोलिए बगल में मिल जाते हैं. So the most important and major खर्चा, because टाइमिंग किट आपको 15,000 20,000 अच्छी भी मिलेंगी, 5-6 हज़ार आपका लेबर जा रहा, बट for some reason if your tensioner fails and your timing slips, then your whole engine is grenaded, especially the head, because ये गाड़ियों का aluminium head resurfacing वो ये उतनी अच्छी नहीं होती, तो looking for a used head or a new head तो आप छोड़ ही दो, स्कोडा है वो बिस्मिल्लाह हो जाता मसला. That will end up costing you more than a lakh, even 2 lakhs under some cases if you're going for a full engine rebuild. So you know, please पहले लेते ही tensioner का काम करा लो. Moving on to 2. So moving on to number 2, AC compressor. Now with my personal experience, I feel it's not exactly a problem with the AC compressor. लोग बोलते हैं इसके कंप्रेसर कमज़ोर रहते, क्लचान टूट जाते. Exact root cause of the problem is just a 2,000 rupees का pulley, which is called your alternator pulley, also known as a one-way pulley. So basically the function of that pulley is it sits on your alternator. So when your engine is spinning in one direction, the belt, the accessory belt basically is in charge of taking care of your, in some cars, the water pump. इसमें तो it is chain driven, but अपना AC compressor, alternator और engine main नीचे harmonic pulley से जो belt जाके बैठता, the one-way pulley is responsible that it should only rotate the alternator in one direction. So basically you understand, right? Pulley एक तरफ फिरी तो alternator के अंदर की assembly को फिराती, but if you turn it the other way, it should rotate freely. It should not rotate the alternator. So the whole purpose of that is when you're accelerating and when you're letting off the throttle, when the engine is decelerating, the pulley should be able to decelerate freely. Most of the cases that pulley gets jammed because गाड़ी कम चली तो अरे भाई गाड़ी खाली 30,000 चली है, भाई गाड़ी 10 साल पुरानी हुई है, वो भी याद रखो. So those pulleys tend to get jammed up, just a 2,000 rupee part, and उसके साथ साथ get your alternator के अंदर के भी 2 bearing आते, get it completely serviced. If your OAP is good, that is not going to put a lot of tension on your other pulleys. Basically what happens is when the OAP jams up, it puts a lot of tension on the belt, on your harmonic crank pulley, but the crank pulley can handle it, but the AC compressor pulley is a little delicate. So what happens is it puts a lot of load under deceleration, and over time the clutch just snaps and your AC compressor pulley fails and it fails to engage the compressor. So you know, compressor in itself 20-25 हज़ार का रहता. So get your bearings changed, that's going to save you a lot of headache. So Schaeffler LUK is the OE for all the bearings and everything else in this car. It's a very easily sourceable part, you can find it anywhere. It's called a one-way alternator pulley. So yup, change that, it's going to save you a lot of money. And obviously I don't have to say it out loud, get your AC compressor serviced with the right grade of oil, the gas and everything else, and you'll be good to go. So moving on to number 3, that is the infamous ticking noise from the engine. So let me be very clear upon what happens here. On TSI and TFSI basically are like brothers. You know, Rahman, Abdul Rahman, so you know, you get the point, right? So in TSI engines, on Gen 2 especially, you only got VVT on the intake cam. In the later iterations of the engine, like in Gen 3, you get VVT. VVT is basically variable valve timing. Different companies use different brand names, but basically does the same job, uses a little solenoid which is actuated by your oil pressure to move the cam gear a little आगे या पीछे, advance or retarded timing under light acceleration or heavy acceleration. That's for basically improving your fuel economy and power and everything else. That's just the most layman's explanation I can give you. But what exactly happens here is a lot of people don't maintain the right amount of oil in their cars, because these engines are tend to leak oil very often, and they drink oil, which वो भी आगे बोलूँगा किस वजह से. So if you do not maintain proper oil level in your car, if it's always at the minimum or below minimum and you keep driving it like that, the solenoid which actuates your intake cam basically has tiny screens, and वहाँ पे oil pressure loss होने की वजह से the cam gear is starved of oil, and over time the solenoid just fails and then your VVT just simply stops working. So you'll get notice in a lot of cases. How to diagnose that problem is अगर engine से head से बहुत टिक टिक आवाज़ आ रही, little टिक टिक is okay because these VW engines tend to be a little noisy. But you remove the coupler from your VVT solenoid, that noise goes away. You plug it back in, tick 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 फिर से शुरू हो जाती, and in some cases your check light comes up. That is a very major, it's not a major thing. You can drive the car like that, but बिना VVT के you're not getting that power, you're not getting that efficiency. Basically आपके लग गए समझो. So finding a new cam, good luck. Skoda के पास जाइए, गुड़दे बेच दीजिए. Finding a good used cam is also a tricky job, and it's going to be pretty expensive, 20-30,000 bucks. So yeah, this is something which when buying the car, inspect it. If there's too much ticking noise in the from the head area, just don't go for it. Remove your coupler, check everything. And that, moving on to number 4, that is your infamous fuel delivery system, especially the HPFP, that's your high pressure fuel pump, your LP, that's your low pressure fuel pump, and the low pressure fuel pump relay. So this can be a little tricky to diagnose sometimes. I've seen this problem come up in cars which have been parked for a very long time. Basically आप गाड़ी दिन को at least 1 किलोमीटर भी चलाए तो ज़्यादा तकलीफ देंगी नहीं उन्हें. But in most of the cases, multiple people have faced multiple weird issues. In some cases, cold cranking is a problem. In some cases, गाड़ी start होती, जबरदस्त चलती, एक 50 किलोमीटर चला के रुकते ही बगैर स्टार्ट ही नहीं होती. You have to pour some water on your HPFP. That your HPFP is basically your high pressure pump, which is located right beside your valve cover. So let me explain the fueling system in turbocharged cars a little bit, especially in Skodas. You have a low pressure fuel pump which is in your tank, which is actuated by your relay. Sometimes the relay can get stuck. That's a very common problem. So yeah, change that. ज़्यादा महंगा पार्ट नहीं है. वो रिले को सीट के नीचे आता है, वो रिले एक बार चेंज कर लो. Your fuel filter, please go for the one which is rated for this car. For most people here, you just go there, why is Skada का fuel filter दे, वो बोलते पोलो का निकाल के दे देते. They look identical, but if you look behind, the pressure ratings on these are different. So please get the one which is for your car. Don't cheap out and buy a Polo one, because when you're tuning the car and all, that basically reduces your fuel pressure, puts a lot of load on your low pressure and high pressure pumps, and they tend to fail. So high pressure fuel pumps generally never fail, but what time तक गाड़ी खड़ी चली नहीं करी तो the valves or springs inside, they get clogged up. So basically your low pressure fuel pump pumps the fuel from your tank to your HPFP. Your HPFP is actuated by your cam, exhaust cam if I'm not wrong. Cam से pressure build up करके, as the revs climb higher, the high pressure fuel pump increases the pressure, and that pressure is sprayed into your fucking manifold or whatever. कभी ठंडे में start नहीं हो रही, गर्म में start नहीं हो रही. You remove a certain pipe from your high pressure fuel pump, it gives you a hiss and some air, and then you put it back and the car starts. So yeah, HPFPs can be tricky to find in the used market. New is very expensive. So yeah, check that once when you're buying a car. थोड़ा test drive लेके वो भी check कर लो. But if it fails on you, HPFP is the major खर्चा. Your low pressure pump not so difficult. टंकी clean कराने के time पे पूरा निकाल के गड्ढा साफ करके अंदर की motor change कर लेना. And don't cheap out on your fuel filter. Please, you know, good quality one with the exact bar rating. I think 6.6 bar is what these cars need. 4 bar or 3 bar is what the Polo gets. Don't put that, please. That's gonna fuck up your fuel delivery system. So yep, moving on to number 5. Dreaded clutch slave and master cylinder problem. I know, शुरू में बोल देना था, because it is the most common and the most annoying thing that can happen. But it's not such a major thing that can cause, you know, engine failure or something like that. But yeah, कहीं आप ट्रैफिक में फंसे हुए हैं, सीधा क्लच पेडल नीचे चले गया बोलते, सीधा धतरा शॉर्ट हुआ था, which is exactly what happened with me and at least 100 others that I can think of. So basically on these cars, modern cars, most of the modern cars, the clutch is actuated by a series of master and slave cylinders. If you know a little about hydraulics, you know what I'm talking about. आपके क्लच पेडल के पास एक मास्टर सिलेंडर आता, which is responsible for building up fluid pressure all the way to your slave cylinder, which sits near your gearbox. And जब आप यहाँ पे दबाते, इन्हें pressure build up करके वहाँ भेजता, वो pressure से उन्हें दबता, and that's how your clutch is engaged and disengaged. So most common problem with these cars, as the cars get older, and some say that it is a manufacturer defect from Skoda's end, but personally I think when the car is like 10 years old, obviously कुछ ना कुछ. So yeah, don't cheap out there. उससे कुछ खराब होने वाला नहीं है, बस गाड़ी चलेंगी नहीं, because क्लच काम नहीं करेगा तो gear engage disengage नहीं होगा. You're basically stuck on the road with your car either in gear or neutral. You can only change the gears when the car is off. When the car is on, wagon first में डाल के import में जाना पड़ता है, कहीं भी रुकना पड़ा हो तो short होगा. So yep, when you get the car, immediately, no matter what the previous owner tells you, no matter what the previous owner tells you, change both your clutch master and slave together. I think the entire set will cost you around 4-5,000. That's very cheap, trust me, and it will save you from a hassle of bike and car की जंगल में बीच में चले गए और वो उड़ गए, short हुआ था. So please get them changed. Moving on to number 6. Number 6, your ignition coils / spark plugs. Obviously spark plug should be covered under basic maintenance. गाड़ी लेते कि नए spark plugs डाल देना. If you're tuning the car, go for iridium. If you're not tuning the car, basic will work. But yeah, the ignition coils on these cars are prone to fail a lot. And I've seen n number of cars with though original, though duplicate, though APR, though red top, you know, they go all fancy. Please change your ignition coils. If you're planning to keep the car for long, don't cheap out with those 1,500 rupee ke ones. Don't go for OEM Skoda ones. Don't go for Taiwanese red top ones. If you have someone in the US, if you have someone here, please buy NGK like I did, or if you are getting APR for a good deal, get APR coil packs. That is a very common problem, that you throw an engine cord, that engine misfire, this, that, and it's sometimes if your ignition coil fails, obviously the fuel to that cylinder is cut off. These cars are intelligent, but if you keep driving like that with a misfire, your engine cylinder temperature is going to get too high, your plug might melt, and I don't have to tell you what happens next. So please change your ignition coils and spark plugs. Moving on to moving on to the next thing. The next most common भी नहीं बोल सकते, I mean it's generally part of regular maintenance, but change कर लिया तो better है, your PCB system. So basically let me explain it to you what the PCB system does. It's responsible for जब आप गाड़ी भगा रहे हैं, कर रहे हैं, whatever, there is a lot of pressure that builds up in your crank, and that pressure is bound to throw some oil up. But that oil and the pressure has to go somewhere, so there has to be some venting system. Bikes में it's a very primitive and basic system. सीधा नीचे crank से tube जाती, airbox में छूट जाती. But on these cars you have turbos, high pressure pumps, Baigan, Sakti sub. So there is a complicated set of, you know, PCB valve. That's what it's called, positive crankcase ventilation if I'm not wrong. So it basically vents out whenever the pressure gets too high in the crank or the engine, for that matter. It vents that out. There is a diaphragm inside which opens up. It redirects that crank ka air into your intake manifold, where it gets burnt and sent out through your exhaust pipe. तो अगर आप oil too much maintain कर रहे हैं या कभी oil भी, obviously these cars drink oil for that reason. If your car is drinking oil, one of the most minor reasons might be the PCB head gasket ये वाला है. But yeah, most of the time I've seen it's because of your failing PCB. And finding a good brand PCB is very difficult. If you can find a Febi, good luck with that. A lot of people use Chinese ones or Orca, Vika, whatever. Please, if you can find a good OEM one from Skoda, it's very expensive. But yeah, if you can at least get a Febi or something. Yeah, अगर आप stage 2, stage 3 जा रहे हैं, just get an oil catch can. That eliminates the whole, you know, venting into the intake manifold problem entirely, because when you're venting oil into your intake manifold, these are direct injection cars. Your valves are gonna get clogged up. अच्छा जान दो, deep में नहीं जाता हूँ. There is a separate video, whole separate video for that. So yeah, your PCB system. And yes, हैबत नहीं खा जाना कभी PCB system fail होने की वजह से the car will start sending out white smoke through the back. You're gonna get oil smell. गाड़ नको फटा लो कि इंजन बैगन में मिल गया, पिस्टन रिंग उड़ गया, crank उड़ गया. First diagnose your PCB. If the diaphragm gets stuck open, too much oil will be dumped into your intake manifold, and that's what's causing the white smoke. So yep, get it checked. It's a tricky problem. कभी check light आती, कभी नहीं आती. Yeah, moving on to the next thing, your N54 purge valve. N54, N36, yeah, I think it's N54. So yeah, so what your purge valve does is basically it's an emissions equipment. So when you're putting there is no. When you're putting petrol in your tank, so there is always, हमेशा full पे तो नहीं चलाते, ऊपर नीचे होता रहता. There are certain petrol fumes that build up in your tank. So the work of this N54 valve is, it opens up when the pressure builds up too much inside your tank. Those vapors are vented out through this valve through a charcoal canister, filtered and put back in your intake manifold. So that kind of theoretically should improve your efficiency, but 8-9 से ज़्यादा ये गाड़ियाँ देते नहीं. So you know, that's a joke. But yeah, basically that's so that the vapors don't get dumped out into the atmosphere, and you know, you don't get slapped with a lawsuit, जो कि US में होता है, इधर तो लाइट है सीन. But yeah, basically emissions equipment. But if that fails, the car's gonna run a little funny, because obviously emissions को बहुत seriously लेना शुरू करे VW group वाले of recently, and basically you get that annoying check engine light with that typical error code, that N54 solenoid failing, this, that. So yeah, finding that one is really tricky. Get a used one from a good car, or find a new Chinese one and just change the entire setup. The part itself is not that expensive, but changing it, good luck, because pipe यूं फिर के जाता. So you know, change your purge valve. So yeah, the last thing on the list for today, the infamous steering rack. So ये ज़्यादा कोई listing करे नहीं, but coming from personal experience, because इसका steering rack is around 1.5 lakh, very expensive in the showroom. compared to Amio, Polo का आपको 15-20 हज़ार में मिल जाता. So you know, buying a new steering rack for these cars is out of question. But I've seen cars that have not run a lot, yeah, which have run in a lot of humid, moist weather with a lot of flooding and all. The steering rack के seals and all seem to fail, and you know अंदर rack pin इनमें play आके टक 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 आवाज़ शुरू हो जाते हैं. Same goes for the column, both hard खड्डे वड्डों पे, especially if you're buying a used project car with lowering springs and all, that's going to put a lot of load. So yeah, steering rack overall हो जाता 10-15 हज़ार में, maybe a little less than that, but if it's too fucked, it cannot be overall. So when you're buying a car, take your good mechanic, make sure कि suspension के issues ना हो. कोई गाड़ी आपको 2000 रुपये में AK-47 तो मिलने वाली है नहीं. But if you're buying the car, please check if the steering rack is repairable. It's a very tricky thing to say, and I thought include नहीं करूँगा इसमें, but please, that's a very expensive thing. But get one which doesn't have too much play, doesn't have too much noise, because rack and column दोनों भी very expensive to replace and repair होते, but वो originality नहीं आती. My car has already been repaired once, and you know, that's about it. बाकी सब चीज़ां तो देखा जाए तो बहुत चीज़ें हैं. Intake valve gets clogged, lot of other things, but yeah, majorly if you're through with these 8, 9, 10 things, whatever I've listed, I think mostly you're good to go. Yes, Skoda is a pain, but comparing to BMW and Merc, the part prices and the headache is not as much. BM में तो हरने को भी मॉड्यूल रहता होगा अपना, so it's pretty complex like that. So yeah, आज का वीडियो ज़्यादा कॉमेडी नहीं था, it was a little informative. So yeah, if you're planning to pick up anything with a 1.8 TSI Gen 2 engine, Laura, Superb, whatever, auto, manual, forgot to tell you, if you're picking up an automatic 1.8 TSI, don't. The DQ200 is famous for clutch failures because there's a technical reasoning behind that. It's got a dry clutch system. The mechatronics unit, which is responsible, that's the brain of the transmission, is not dipped in oil. So yeah, if you're buying one, please make sure you're buying someone who has changed their DSG fluid every 30,000 kilometers. Even then, it's a tricky slope, so you know. अब ऐसा देखने जाए तो problem रहते हैं, but it's like a very toxic relationship. It's like when you get in bed with it, you keep forgetting, you forget all your issues and basically just bang bang. So yeah, that's it for today's videos. Hope you guys didn't get bored. Hope it was informative. Please follow me, follow Check Engines, follow Detailing Sutra. All the links and everything else is down below. If you have any more questions, please drop them down in the comments below, and Instagram pe please feel free to DM me. And yeah, trying to get back in the action. The next video we'll see क्या title रहेगा, mostly about the build, or you know, the stage 1 stage 2 shutiapa that's going around. So yeah, thank you for watching, and bye bye.